All right. Let's get rolling here. Let me just do a quick. All right. So we are on day 7. Tomorrow morning, probably 8 o'clock tomorrow morning until 8 o'clock the following Wednesday morning. The skills test and the multiple choice final exam will be available. I haven't decided if I'm using the built-in curriculum skills test or if I'm going to deliver one to you myself. The current format for CCNA2 is there are 2 packet tracer skills assessment labs. There's a couple of issues that they kind of bug me. Number one, they split the curriculum. So there's 2 different labs, and one of them has a bunch of topics, and then the other one has a bunch of topics, and there's only a very little overlap between the 2. So you could, I guess, if you were doing this in a semester class, you could deliver the first one after, prepping them and getting through all of that curriculum. And then when you finish second half of the curriculum, deliver the second one. There's a couple things that I don't really worry too much about with the ITC teachers because, I mean, let's face it, how much do we really expect you to get in this 1 week session? Like the wireless LAN controller stuff is brand new, and it's really just about being familiar with the interface for the WLC and the process. And so I don't really worry too much about that. I usually don't worry about, a couple of other topics as well. And I'll just have to decide. Let's just see what else is in there. The DHCP snooping and ARP inspection, stuff like that. That's all nice and fine and dandy. But again, the chances are you're probably going to be configuring DHCP on your domain controller and not worrying about running it on a router. So I'm contemplating, delivering a self-made PTSA, or possibly borrow like part 1 and then deliver, add some additional stuff to it. So, all right. So let's get things underway. So you were all tasked to come with some questions. And we'll go around the room. We'll take one question from each person, and then we'll go around again and again until we exhaust all the questions. Mostly because some of you are going to have the same questions, and I want to give everybody the opportunity to ask their question. So hopefully we can make one full round where everybody had something that they wanted a little clarification or better understanding, whatever, more examples. So who would like to start?
I'll start. Jefferson.
Jefferson. Okay. What do you got?
The labs are there to be submitted. I said that they have 0 point value.
Yeah, right. So
But
when it comes to your grade for this course, it really is the only two things that really impact the score is the skills test and the final exam. The labs count in as much as we make sure that you're doing them and you're having reasonable levels of success. Obviously, they're intended to be simpler. You know, if you're staying on top of them, you're doing them that evening. They're fresh. So what we want to see is that you're having good success with the labs, and then of course that you have what we consider to be reasonable success / progress with the final and with the skills test. Obviously, we're not looking for, the Cisco 85 like they do on the CCNA exam. It's not uncommon for us to have people in the 50s on the skills test, and get maybe 70, 75 on the final, or even a 60 on the final and a 40 or 45 on the skills when we do these things in person. So the fact that we're doing these in a remote session, we're looking for better, than 60s and 40s because, you've got resources at your fingertips. So our definition of reasonable success, it changes a little bit. But we're really just looking for an overall big picture. We don't grade the labs, like we don't count that, and there's no magic score. We've had people come in and do what's called a fast track and, just sit there and take the final and have just that one grade. We've actually had people come in that had certification and, David would have a conversation with them for an afternoon and then just certify them, with no grades. So there's no restrictions on it from a grading standpoint in Netacad on us. It's up to us to decide whether the participant is reasonably prepared or not.
Thank you.
Yep. Anybody else?
Just a general question, Mike.
Yep.
Doing the port security lab last night, there's a lot of little details in there.
Yep.
This is implemented. In practice, do people implement port security, or is it kind of a specialty thing?
Yeah, there are people that use it. It's one of those things where don't rely on it and don't feel like this is a huge protection. But, in the same conversation, the more obstacles you put in their way, the harder it's going to be for a would-be hacker to penetrate. So, there's a term that you will start hearing as you progress through Cisco courses, if you haven't already heard it, but the term is defense in depth.
Yeah.
Right? Don't just put one thing out there and say, okay, I'm protected, right? It really is, a much bigger picture, and you want to implement all the things that really are going to help you. And then, of course, you have to decide within your organization, is switchport port security really necessary? In a position where you're, I don't know, maybe you're a small law office, right? You got a couple secretaries, got a bunch of lawyers, a few paralegals. I mean, are you really worried about these guys hacking your network? Probably not, right? They're using machines that you've provided anyway. So, chances are it's not really necessary or important. You're in a public education on a college campus. Is it possible that a student will plug in their own device? And then, of course, because they have their own device, they can run applications like Wireshark and, Metasploit and all these Kali Linux and all these other tools that could, give them information or prove damaging to the network. So, you have to pick your battles, and you have to understand what are the implications. And if somebody were to run Wireshark because they disconnected the PC that's on their desk and plugged it into their laptop, there's probably a good chance they already know how to spoof their MAC address too, right? I mean,
Yep.
Lickety split, my MAC address is different, and boom. So, I don't think there's a ton of people relying on port security in that sense.
I was thinking, in an enterprise,
Yeah.
it just, there are lots of steps there. I can envision easily that you may have a standard setting for all your ports that you want to propagate throughout your organization.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
And so the question is, man, to do this on a port by port basis is just not.
No. You would use the range command for sure.
Okay. Yeah.
So when you get onto a switch, chances are all of your access ports are going to have all of the same switch port security settings. Right. The maximum number of MAC addresses will be the same across the board. The violation mode will be the same across the board. And you can build a little config where you do the entire range on the entire switch minus your trunk links. So this really speaks to planning, right? When you plan a network, it's really critical that you think about these things, because if you just haphazardly are plugging in ports, then it becomes challenging because your range becomes discontiguous. Because that one's a server, so we need multiple. And you say, wait a minute, a server is just an end device; it's a host. But in today's market, we're running virtual servers. So you've got an ESXi server, but there's 8 server VMs running on it, and they all have different MAC addresses. So it's not the MAC address of that physical, it's the MAC address that the individual VMs are propagating out. So, you have to keep these things in mind, right? And also make sure that you treat the port going to your ESXi server as a trunk port. Ooh. I spoke to you the other day about me having those aha moments. Yeah.
But when you have to trunk that port for the BHI,
you would if you were
too.
Sure. If you're pushing more VLANs out of that ESXi server.
Yeah.
Right. If everything's just on VLAN 1, on the virtual switch, you're fine. But if you are actually indeed running multiple VLANs, then you are going to have to trunk on the ESXi server. You're going to have to configure it, and on the switch, you configure it as a trunk link for sure. Absolutely.
And so the thing is that what I didn't see so far in the lesson was like the LACP trunks that we were doing.
Ether channel.
But, yeah.
That's not a trunk. That's an Ether channel.
Yeah. Okay, yeah, I got those two confused because what I'm so used to doing, and I apologize, but I'm a server admin, so I'm so used to setting up DHCP, not on the switch, but actually in on a domain controller.
Of course. Yeah.
Setting my scope there, and setting my lows and highs there.
Yeah, and we wouldn't configure it on a switch. We would configure it on a routable device.
Yeah.
So it could be done on a layer 3 switch, just not a layer 2 switch. And
okay.
And I mentioned that when we taught it, right? Yeah, this is interesting to know, but reality, you're going to run it on your Active Directory server probably.
Are layer 3 switches much more expensive? Because I don't see them around too often.
They are more expensive, yes. Much more, not so much anymore. Boy, when they were first popular, yeah, they were, multiple times more expensive than its equivalent layer 2 version. Nowadays, it's a few $100s more. I remember at Questar when they upgraded to a gig network, they actually abandoned Cisco devices and went with the 3coms, which eventually got purchased by HP, I think. But they went with the 3coms, and back then, just a straight up layer 2 gig access switch you could get for $400 or $500, and the layer 3 switch with all the similar capacities as the layer 2, but with all the layer 3 functionality added to it, was about $2,500. So you were looking at a multiple of 5, but they went with the 3coms because at that time the gigabit layer 3 switch on the Cisco side was about $5,000, somewhere between $4,000 and $5,000. So they were saving $1,500 anyway on each switch, and if they had to put 16 of them in, it's not chump change anymore. However,
I think the switches have gone through what I refer to as the digital watch syndrome.
Yeah.
When digital watches first came out, thousands and thousands of dollars to get one. Now you can pick one up for $10 at Walmart.
Yeah.
The same thing happened with the layer 3 switches.
I mean, remember the first calculators we used back in high school? They were $100 a piece, and they could add, subtract, multiply, and divide. It was like, oh, wow, look at this. Wait a minute, I can do all that stuff. Why do I need the calculator? Now you just do it on your digital watch, right? Do it on your phone, whatever. So it's, it's one of those things. I think it's silly to configure DHCP on a router. It just doesn't make any sense. That's just my 2 cents. Anybody else questions? This is all for you.
So I have a question about the labs. I know you spoke of this already, that you don't really grade the labs too much, but you just look to see whether or not we complete them and have some understanding.
Yep.
I'm stuck on a couple of things, and I don't have it up in front of me right now, but can I email you later on, just ask you where
Of course.
Yeah.
That's what we're here for. Absolutely. And here's the thing. If you're in that lab and you're at like 80, 85%, and you're just like, okay, well, I did the lab and I got a good thing, but I still want to know why I couldn't get past this section. Feel free to submit it, right? 80, 85, that's fine. I call that great success, for somebody who's taken this course to learn this content. That's wonderful. Email it to me. I can open it up and get in underneath everything to see what you're missing, and I can communicate with you. Now, it's up to you whether you resubmit or not. You don't have to, but you can. But just keep in mind, and this goes for everybody, please, please, please make sure that if you do additional submissions on a lab, that you resubmit all of the files so that I don't have to download them one at a time. This is a real pet peeve of mine with Netacad, that when the student does multiple submissions, it used to be it would wipe out the previous ones and you could only get the latest one. Now you could at least go back and see the previous submissions. But when I download all the files that you guys have submitted, it doesn't give me all of them. It only gives me the latest submission for all the students. So if there were 7 labs and you were submitting them one at a time, I'm getting one of them. So now I got to go back into each student, pull down a drop-down menu, go to the previous submission, download it, go to the one before that, one before that, the one before that, the one before that, and do that times how many ever students are in a class. When you do it that way, it's harder because Netacad doesn't attach your name to that file anymore. When I bulk download, let me open up, I'm going to share my screen, and I'm going to...
That's actually one of my next questions too, because I'm saving all my labs to submit to you all at once.
Absolutely.
Would you prefer I just zip them and submit them?
No.
Nope.
Let me do a quick Netacad thing, because this is something that's good to show. All right, desktop one, good. Okay. So in Netacad, is there somebody here who has resubmitted a lab? Like you submitted one or two files and then maybe another one or two. Anybody?
I can submit 3 right now.
Okay. And then
Yeah,
just tell me which lab.
Mike, my very first one, I struggle with it. I submitted it 4 or 5 times. Yeah, one piecemeal, one at a time.
Okay, so Bob, I gotcha. All right, so let me go through that one. So here's the lab. So I go in and I open Module 1 Labs, and I can go to this download submissions. So I'm just going to click on this download submissions. It's automatically going to zip up all of the latest submissions, and it puts the user's name in the file name. It attaches the user's name. So way back when I first started, I was like, oh, okay, you know, make sure you put your name on the file. And then when I first downloaded them, I was like, oh, why is his name on there twice? That's when I realized. All right, so I download. Let me just... So I've already downloaded mod 1 through 4 labs. I'm going to re-download them. And I just give them names. It's a zip file. Yes, replace it. And then I'm going to go to that folder. Where are you? ITC. Oh, you're not there. Let me just get there this way. See 2020. Okay. All right. So, right, this is, somebody had a question. Nate had a question, so he submitted a lab to me. I opened it and I and looked at. So this is the one I just did. So if I extract that here, it's going to put a 1 on it, right? And there's all of the files. And notice everybody's name's on it. Right? So it looks to me like most people probably submitted pretty much every PKA here. But let's just say for the sake that, you know, somebody, oh, Nate, there you go. So Nate submitted one of the files for lab number 1. Now, Nate, have you finished any of the others?
I have, and I fit in other modules too.
Sure. No, I understand. So could you go and submit at least one other one for mod 1 through 4? Or all of them,
Yep,
if you're
I
done
will do
with
that
all
now.
of
Give
them.
me 1 second.
Right? So what we have from him is 1.4.7. So if I go to Speed Grader, right, Ahmed submitted all the labs in one shot. I know that because there's no little drop down. Nate submitted one file, and then there's another submission, right? So there's a file. Now, I didn't get that file because this is not the latest submission. That's the problem. Now, when I download this, I can download it. That's fine. But notice it doesn't put his name in there, just the name of the file as I named it. And it's like, oh, now I got to type it. So imagine a college classroom with, 18 or 20 students, and, 4 or 5 labs times, 8 or 10 lab assignments, that's a lot of manual intervention that could be,
I just submitted them.
yeah. So we could eliminate that by just saying, look, download or upload them all at once. Okay. So,
Okay.
that's all. So now let me just reload the speed grader. And right now there's today's lab, right? So now there's those 2. So I have to go to each one of these to get all of those files from Nate. You see what I'm saying, Nate?
I get what you're saying. Okay.
So now I know it's I'm asking a lot, but go back to that assignment and make sure you attach all of the lab files to it.
Okay.
Right? Add files, re-upload all of them.
Can I do last week's assignment 5 and 6? I have
Of course.
those.
Yeah. You're right.
Right.
So go through all of the labs if you've not submitted them as one bundle, and make sure you submit them all at once.
Okay.
This is one of my pet peeves with Netacad. And, when you resubmit, you can't attach but only one of your previously submitted files. That they promised they were going to fix. They didn't. I don't know if they couldn't or not. Of course, now they're not even going to work on it because they're migrating to a new LMS. So, whatever. It's one of those things. It is frustrating, but it's technology, right? We all know that. We've all experienced that, something's broken, but all of our tests show that nothing's broken, right? But yet it's still not working properly. And we know, we've all been there, and, yeah, it bugs me. I get upset, but you get over it, right? Because sometimes you just don't know why it's not working right. All right. Anybody else?
I just wanted to throw in there, Nate, if you get to a point where you're almost finished with one of the packet tracers and you can't figure, you're at 80% or whatever, you can't figure out what's wrong. If you do that, check bit where you can go in and see check the results. If you go down through that, sometimes you can see what you are missing, right, and then go back through the curriculum and see if you
sometimes that's locked though.
Yeah, sometimes it's locked, but I'm saying for a lot of these where you can do that, you can sometimes go in and figure out what you did wrong and fix it.
Right. And don't forget, don't tell this to your students, but if, like, I lock them, a lot of them, just because I want to use it more as a true assessment piece. Also because what I've found is students tend to stop reading directions and they just start looking at that list. Oh, I got to configure this. I got to configure this. And they lose that ability to communicate with their other team members. So somebody starts talking to them about a problem and they're clueless because they never really internalized the language that goes along with the task. But if you are stuck and the assessment items are locked or check results is locked, you can always go into the curriculum, into the textbook, and download that lab, and they are not locked. None of the labs are locked in the textbook. They're all, you can see the assessment items for all of them. This is something that I do on a personal level with my students. So you have to decide whether you want to go through that. Ethan, got a question?
I do. And this might be slightly out of scope or maybe should have been addressed in Bernadette's class. In terms of, I'm broadly familiar with cyber policy, but in terms of hardware access, the banner messages relaying authorization is required, et cetera, what level of, how much coverage does that provide? I mean, does that essentially waive all or provide sort of blanket?
You know what? That's up to a judge to decide. But the bottom line is, in a real enterprise network, you're going to have a lawyer that's going to say, "Here, this is your banner," and you're going to say, "Yes, sir." and you're just going to paste it in there in the proper format, and it's going to have all kinds of legal mumbo jumbo, and it's going to be 47 pages. Well, not quite that long, but fairly long, so that, you know, there's disclaimers in there that say that if you are, you know, basically if you're not supposed to be on this device and you are not an employee or affiliated with this company in a way that should extend access to you, you're going to jail, right? That's bottom line. You know, we kind of get that message in a very, very basic way by saying authorized access only. So that's not really truly enough for real heavy hitters. I mean, if we're talking real cybercrime, that might not be quite enough. But if you've got little Johnny that hacked into the school's router, servers, whatever, then now it's up to Johnny to prove that he has authorization to be there. Because I've stated very clearly it's authorized access only. You know, and little Johnny probably isn't going to hire the kind of lawyer, because let's face it, what's going to happen to him? He's going to get a 5-day suspension. And then when he comes back, he's probably going to get hired to work with the IT group, right? I mean, let's face it. So obviously the language, the legalese level in your banner message of the day has to be kind of match the
consistent corporate policy and all that.
The corporate policy and the level of needed security based on, you know, what is it you do, right? If I'm manufacturing Legos in my factory, you know, come on, really? Not a whole lot that I'm worried about. I mean, you know, if we're talking about a medical research company, well, now that's a whole different ballgame.
Well, that butts up against HIPAA if they're accessing patient data. I mean, I get that part. I was just wondering if you were familiar with any sort of case law precedent for.
No, and if you take the cybersecurity curriculum at UAlbany, and I say this just because Ethan adjuncts, I believe, at UAlbany still.
I do, and I teach some of it. Yeah.
So a lot of that cybersecurity curriculum at UAlbany is really from an administrative perspective, and it's about policy writing and understanding policies, and less about the hands-on nitty-gritty of, you know, protecting against a cyber attack.
Right.
And frankly, in just my 2 cents, UAlbany went about it the wrong way. They really should get on board, and because, you know, you talk to a kid in high school and say, go to UAlbany and do their cybersecurity. Well, what am I going to learn? Oh, you're going to learn about how to write policies. They're going to be like, screw that. I don't want to. I want to get into I want to configure the routers and the switches and the software to prevent this all from happening. So
that doesn't exist there, and they have 3 different programs in 3 different schools that don't talk to each other.
Yeah, so. and well, actually, from what I understand, their forensics program, I think, gets into that a little bit, right? I don't know why UAlbany was so reluctant to become a Cisco Academy, because all they would have to do is say, oh, great, we can fire up that course, and there, we got a 3-credit course, and we're going to provide curriculum that the student is looking for.
There's only one person that I'm aware of that really teaches networks across the College of Homeland Security, the business school where the digital forensics program is, and sort of a split between the computer science and informatics / information science.
Yeah.
It's
minimal. I'm aware of that. Right. So I send students to SUNY Adirondack for that, because Karen Woodard up there, Karen and I are very good friends. You know, she's another instructor trainer, and in fact, she's the instructor trainer for the cyber ops curriculum. So if you want a fun curriculum that's really going to be challenging, but in a good way, it's going to drive you crazy, but it's going to be fun. It's going to be hands-on. You should do the cyber ops with Karen. It is phenomenal.
I think a lot of the community colleges in the area, Mohawk with Jake Mievik, they all the community colleges do a much better job than SUNY for that.
Yeah, except Hudson Valley. I've been trying to get them on board with it.
Even then, I mean, Hudson Valley has a superior networking.
Yeah, sure, right. We have CCNA, CCNP, CCNA wireless and voice.
They're all great. Our best students come from community colleges.
Right, the CCNA security, and we were about to start firing up some IoT courses. So we have to revisit that, but that'll be a fall 21 kind of thing.
Hey, Michael, question on that?
Bob, yeah?
Yeah, are you able, so you talk about the more advanced courses, you know,
Sure.
CCNP and IoT. Are you able to fill those classes with students?
The CCNA security, we have a very hard time filling. You know, if I can get 8 people in there, we're doing okay. But personally, I think that works great because we have 9 pods, and I would like to have one student have one whole pod. It gives them more stuff to configure. When you pair them up, it's good because they take turns being the primary versus the secondary. Because a lot of the configuration in the security class, there's one router that does all the heavy hitting, and the other ones have to be configured for just, you know, participating, set up the routing, and, you know, maybe there's a little bit to do on that side, but most of it's on one router. So they just go back and forth and take turns. The IoT classes we have not offered yet. So that was something we were supposed to start working on in the springtime when the pandemic hit, and we were hoping to get ready for fall, but obviously there's a monkey wrench in the works. The CCNP classes are another challenge. You know, again, I think the CCNP route, maybe CCNP route and CCNP switch. I can't remember if they're both required for one of our degrees. So it's about how many students sign up for that degree program. There's a couple different pathways, obviously, and one of them doesn't require that stuff, and one of them does, the advanced classes. But nothing requires the CCNA security. That's an elective. And, you know, that's one of the challenges. Students today, I'm sure we all see it, they're looking to get the most for the least. You know, I want the best paying job, but I want to do the least amount of work to get there. You know, well, that job doesn't exist. Anybody else?
Mike, I have a question. The live labs, the live equipment labs.
Yep.
We still don't know what we're going to be doing in the fall for class. So I'd like to set up for completely online
And have remote access.
And hope for hybrid. I don't think that we're going to go into class like everybody is in person live type of thing.
Sure.
I do have some routers and switches in there. Do I need to work with IT in order to get them set up so that students could log into them remotely?
Yes. And it's kind of the same scenario, whether you want to rack them in a single space and kids access them from on campus, right? Versus just having them sit at their desks. It's kind of cool to have every desk have its own little rack of 2 or 3 routers, 2 or 3 switches, and, you know, maybe a couple of virtual hosts that they can. That's awesome. But how do they practice when they're not sitting at that desk? So as much as it's nice for them to cable and play and touch and feel and say, this is my rack, you know, once it's cabled, and, you know, why would you really want them plugging and unplugging cables every single day? Because eventually, you know, that interface is just going to get damaged, and then you're out a router or a switch. So my suggestion would be to set up a rack somewhere that's by itself, that all of the pods are there and they're wired, and use the access server technology that I spoke about early last week. I was working with, it was Bob, right? We stayed in a in a meeting after the class was over, and we did some pricing out. I want to say that for a single rack that had, let's say, 8, 16, 24 devices on it, for like $400, you could get remote access set up to it. You buy a 2811 router with an NM32 synchronous, asynchronous card with the octal cables, and as long as IT will give you a public IP address or a port map, they have to port map the ports. So like for me to communicate with routers on Hudson Valley campus, I have to know the IP address and a port number. And traditionally, the port numbers start at 2000 on a single router. So I have 3 racks. Each has its own access server. So when I SSH to the first IP address, 2001, all the way to 2024, that gives me, pod 1 is 2001 to 2008. Pod 2, which is below it, which is 4 route. All of them are 4 routers, 4 switches, is 2009 through 2016 and 2017 through 2024. And each rack has an additional 8 ports that I can still fire up. So if you have 2 racks and you have less than 32 devices, that one access port can feed both racks. It's not a problem. It really boils down to simplicity. So even though I probably could have configured the entire setup with 2 access servers, it from a visual standpoint, it's nice that this IP address is this whole rack. The next IP address is this whole rack, and the next IP address is this whole rack. And I don't have to worry about, oh, wait a minute, these IP addresses are on rack 2, these ports are on rack 2, these ports are on rack 3, and it's really not that expensive. So for each rack, $400, you could light it up. And it is pretty straightforward and easy. I was going to try to do, now that I totally forgot about it, when we did packet trace, I was going to show you how to set up an access server to do all that. And it totally slipped my mind. But, it's about configuration. And once you get the access server set up, I can send you a sample config, and, you can just drop it on there and configure it and change the numbers and the settings to suit your needs. It's really pretty straightforward.
Yeah, if you could send that to me, that would be great. I actually, the setup in my classroom is 4 racks, and each rack has 6 switches, and I just purchased new routers, and I think there are 6 routers per rack.
So
I don't use all of them because I don't have large classes.
No,
in there.
but still, you got 12 devices per rack, right?
Yes.
Okay. So if in your case, because I know education is just overflowing with extra money, I would order 2 access servers. I would get 2 32-port network module cards, and I would get enough octal cables to fill all 4 ports on each of them. So I would get 8 of the octal cables. You have to decide length. Probably the 10-footers will be good enough because first off, you only got 12 devices, so you can compress them a little bit more, leave space up top, leave space down below. I don't know if you recall the image that I had up at Hudson Valley, but let me just show you. I can't remember. Bob, do you remember, was it Cables and Kits or was it Cisco Land that we found the better pricing? I think it was Cisco Land, if I'm not mistaken, right?
Back in my notes, it's Cables and Kits. That rings a bell, though.
We were on both of them. So like, see here, it's terminal servers. Let's just go in here real quick. So these are 2600s. Yeah, it was cables and kits because we looked at the 2800. But you see here, this is a network module. Let's just bring that up. Right, and there's 2 ports on here. The NM32 has 4, so I would do the NM32. So let's go over to cables and kits. A 2800 series router. Right, I mean, you can get a 2811, $85. I mean, come on, right? How cheap is that? You don't need to get the best one, the biggest and the best. I mean, 68 for a 2821, as long as it supports the network module, right, which is going to be a full height kind of thing. And then we're looking for an NM32, right? So here's an NM32, right? See, they have two cards, so you get 4 ports. This goes into it goes into.
Are you guys going through that? Just a little sideline is that if you go to Connecticut and Massachusetts state surplus, Bob, I don't know if we can do this for Massachusetts, but you go to the state surplus website, you can find all these devices for like
Sure.
$20 to $30 as well too.
Yeah, right. So this is just one of those. If you can't find the device, with us, typically we don't see this on state surplus, or the way New York works typically is they put a whole bunch of shit on a pallet. You got to buy the whole pallet, right? And
I agree.
The network card could be on one pallet and the router could be on another pallet. And they know this. This is how they get rid of a lot of equipment. And, you end up spending, $1,000 on 2 or 3 pallets so that you can get, $500 worth of gear. And now you have to recycle all the other crap that they were looking to get rid of. So, but absolutely, there's some schools have restrictions. No, they have to be on the state contract and blah, blah, blah. Fine. Whatever. I go here because what I look at is, excuse me, let me just close that. I use this to show people what the part is, and then you have to decide where to get it. But this is also an option if you can. So, we're talking $126 for the network module, $85. So what are we up to? $210, $215. And then the cables, the cables you can get, I know they were over here for, I forget what they were, like octal cables for terminal servers. The thing I would make sure is that you got to make sure you find out that this block, that this side of the plug matches these ports. I ordered some octal cables and they used a stock photo of an octal cable. And what I got was not the photo. They were a smaller SCSI style. It was like a SCSI 3 connector. I believe what's on, come on, get away. I believe that what's on these is a SCSI 2 connector. Don't quote me on that. So I would call Cables and Kits and say, I want this NM32 and I want to get octal cables, 4 of them, or if you're going to get 2 of them, get 8 of them that go with this, and then decide length. So that's kind of a big deal, is making sure that you have the right length. But even if they're $50 a piece, there's $200 in cables, and $220 for the hardware, a little over $400, and you can light up 2 racks. Or 1, obviously. So I'm speaking specifically about your setup, Rhonda, but y'all understand. And they ship them. They have pretty good reputation here. So, you know, if something comes DOA, you're not going to have issues. The only issue you may have is that they might not have a replacement. So you can either wait until they acquire, because these are guys that go out and clean out and they buy crap from state contracts and they resell it, you know, and they clean out office buildings and take the equipment and resell it. They refurbish it, clean it up, make sure it's all in good working order, and then resell it.
Mike, since you said you could probably do the config file, could you also just put together just a like even a simple text file with that list of what the hardware would need to be, right with that?
Yeah,
we haven't
sure.
taken
Sure. So let me, while I'm talking to you guys, I'll go here and put it in the course introduction page. So while I'm kind of working on this, what other questions?
Since I'm already unmuted, most of you know is working in education that we kind of build the airplanes while we fly them. We fly by our seat of our pants, and I go back to a network, and this is it's kind of strange to lead in this way, but I go back to a network that I inherited I inherited 19 years ago, and probably about 18 years ago, I had gotten it to the point where there were no more hubs left, and it was all switch-based. But then I ran into an issue when I started putting out wireless, in that somebody walked in to a remote building, plugged in a wireless access point, had it configured to be a home access point with DHCP running on it, and it took down my entire network. And I guess what became my rule of thumb, and I thought was pretty standard, was the idea that you only had one DHCP server on a network. And yet I get into the chapter on DHCP, and it starts talking about the ability to have multiples. And I'm just wondering if there's any, I don't know, any explanation as to why that would have taken down an entire network, or a way to mitigate that, make it stay up, because it was a lot of fun trying to find that rogue DHCP server that happened to be on that access point.
Is that something that have to do with spanning tree protocol?
DHCP,
It might have.
No.
No?
The way that the rogue DHCP server, just to refresh, they'll go in and do DHCP starvation. So they'll basically use up all the available IP space in the scope. And then the legitimate DHCP server will no longer respond to requests. So then the rogue DHCP server will respond to requests, and then it will hand out IPs. Now, obviously, it depends on the objective of the hacker, you know, that's trying to penetrate or whatever they're trying to do. Are they just looking to be malicious and take down your network? Then they'll give out bogus IP addresses. Are they trying to gather data? Are they data mining? Then they'll give out IP addresses, and they will forward all of your packets to the real gateway and back and forth. And they'll give you the requests so that you keep on surfing, not knowing that anything's wrong. And all the while, they get to scan all the packets that pass through them, because they become the real, you know, the new gateway, and then they do forwarding, IP forwarding to the legitimate gateway, and so forth. So you can have a gateway inside a gateway inside a gateway, and you could like NAT at each hop. It works just fine. It does slow down the performance a little bit, but generally speaking, the average user isn't going to notice it. So they NAT on their routable device to the legitimate gateway. So everything is coming from a single host. That, by the way, is how you find out the IP address of said rogue DHCP/gateway server, because all of the requests now on your legitimate gateway are all coming from the same IP address. Whoa. How can all the data that's being generated all day at our business be coming from one IP address? Now it's just a matter of navigating through your devices and seeing which device that's connected to. And that's where SNMP can come in handy as a network monitoring tool. So
Yeah, the fun with that one was that this was a multi-site um, LAN that was interconnected by buried fiber, and I was having to try to figure out which building it was coming from. And it took a while, but it finally tracked back to the local public library that had a patron that had decided to donate a wireless access point, supposedly configured it so that it would work, and then brought it in, plugged it in, and within an hour or two, I was choked.
So as I'm typing this, I just have to remind you that if I put this in here, next week this link might not be available because those routers might be sold, but at least it's a Cisco 2800 and it's a 2811, right? So and same thing with this, the card. Let's see, does cables and kits have octal?
So with that being said, Michael, because I'm looking at different things, and I'm looking at and I'm thinking with the VLANs and so is there a way, and we might have went through this already. So I went to some college campuses, and when I was teaching security, and I'll say, okay, you have the default gateway. Normally put your default gateway in a web browser, brings you to whatever device is giving out the default gateway, whether it's a firewall or the router. Can you separate that with a VLAN, that the management of the default gateway can't be accessed?
Are you saying, can you prevent rogue users from SSHing to your gateway and making changes?
Yeah, or even getting a web page to the gateway, because this one was you can put the default gateway into a web browser, and it brought you to and let you know which device it was, whether it was a firewall, whether it was just a router, and it just let you know what device to go in and log into.
On your gateway, just disable HTTP services.
Okay.
So now, right, because routers can have HTTP services running, so just turn them off.
Okay.
I believe they're off by default. So if you don't want them on, just turn them off. As far as preventing SSH and terminal remote access, yes, you would do that with ACLs, but you haven't learned ACLs. That's coming in book 3.
Okay.
Yeah.
So would that be best practice for schools? Because
yeah, I mean, first of all, that's what the management VLAN is for. So you would create a VLAN 99 sub interface on your router if you were doing inter-VLAN routing, router on a stick. And you would have ACLs on all of your network devices that only allowed VLAN 99 users to connect directly to the device. Now, you could make it more specific by specifying VLAN 99 users by their host IP address, right? If you're the only IT guy or there's only 2 of you, you put your 2 IP addresses. Presumably, you 2 are the only end devices that are on VLAN 99, and you put those IP addresses within your ACL as these are allowed, and we're gonna drop everybody else. So yeah, I mean, there's so much. We give you a little taste of security through this, just so that you got to remember to keep it in the back of your mind. Security's kind of critical. Let's see. Where is I have a config somewhere. Access server 1 config. Maybe. Anybody else? Shouldn't put that there. Okay, so. We're pretty quiet in here.
I'll have another one, if that's all right.
Absolutely. I have two.
I do end up advising a lot of students in terms of the security, the Cisco security class. It really hasn't been on my radar. Normally, I advise starting with something like the CompTIA Sec Plus or something like that. Where would you rank sort of the utility of the Cisco security? I mean, for me, I'm seeing it more if you're focusing on networking, but I don't.
Yeah. You know, CompTIA's certifications are good for beginners.
Right. And then
I sort of look at CompTIA these days as your high school level and Cisco as your college level.
And
The
CISP
networks,
would be the master's?
say that again?
The CISP would be something like a master's then? Like, where would you rank that?
Yeah, I mean, it could be. If you're a four-year college, obviously you have, you know, a lot more time to offer more classes. You know, you could also, the thing is, to get into network security, you know, like the cyber ops, Cisco will advertise there are no prerequisites for the cyber ops. But those of us that teach it or would like to teach it, our requirements would be A+ class and a Linux class, or at a bare minimum, a comfort level with Linux. So there is a Linux Essentials course in the Cisco Academy that's great to fire up. It's, you know, you don't have to worry about VMs or anything because right in the web browser, it gives the student a VM to play with, to execute all their commands and do all the stuff that they're asking them. Of course, you could encourage your students to say, you know what, instead, on your home computer, install Ubuntu. Here's a nice lab to do that, and try all your commands on that VM and just really get a comfort level so that they don't feel like the VM they're working with in their browser is sort of black magic and it's not really there kind of thing. Because sometimes kids like, yeah, but that's just, it knows what it's supposed to give me, you know, but it's not. It's really a legitimate VM that NDG is spinning up every time you launch that page.
Interesting. Okay.
Yep. I'm just putting in like generic.
I guess on a corollary to that, ranking, say that the Cisco Academy Linux course, say against going back to CompTIA, since they have also the Linux Plus and
Yeah, so
or would the Cisco be?
I have to be honest, I don't know anything really about the CompTIA Linux course. I don't teach it. I've never looked at it. The Linux Essentials is not a certification level course, but in the Cisco Academy, there are 3 Linux courses. Linux Essentials is supposed to get their feet wet, and it does align with part of the certification, but I think you need to do the Linux 1 course. The thing is, with the Linux 1 course, there's a fee involved, and it's not like a huge fee. It's like a $30 fee. But since their textbook is online, $30 to take the course versus, $80 for an IT textbook,
Right.
$30 isn't so bad.
Okay.
So,
All right. Thank you.
yeah.
Might provide a little bit more information about the LPI in the Linux environment.
Yeah.
So the certification one is, if you go into LPI and look at, they have a pre-LPI C1, which is the first certification.
Yeah.
The Cisco Linux 1, Linux 2 is mapped to the LPCI 1, which is the entry-level certification for the Linux.
Oh, I thought it was the Linux 1 course.
And the Linux Essentials is basically the certificate level, not really a certification, but it's a certificate level in LPI.
Yeah, I knew that the Essentials course was not a cert level course, but I thought that LPI, the LPI Linux cert, the first one, mapped to the first course in the Linux.
Now, from my understanding, is the first 2 Linux courses in Cisco maps to the first certification in LPI.
Okay. All right. Well, good. Well, thanks for that.
I think.
Sure. All right. I am just looking at my my config that I had, just making sure that I, take out any configuration that's specific to my environment. And I think I've got it. So there we go. Okay, so on my screen now, I have this page I'm just showing you. So I put a couple links to, these are just so that you at least know what the equipment is that you're looking for. So sample config, we want the timestamps. Whether you do service password encryption or not is up to you. There's a lot of stuff in here that's just in every config file that I didn't take out. Technically, that's just there. That's a default setting. You know about enable secret. We're not doing AAA. If you implement AAA in your network, go ahead. Your IT department may want to take control of this access server as it is a network device, and they will make sure they configure it. As long as the port mapping works fine, you don't need to worry about it, right? Because this is a point of contact for your students. IP subnet 0, this is such an old command. No IP routing, no IP ceph, no IP DHCP. These are, some commands. The IP routing, I have that on there so that it doesn't load a lot of routing processes, because this router is really going to serve as an end device, not as a router that's bridging networks. So having this command turned on, while it's not really necessary, it just helps to prevent the possibility that we could have an accidental bridge. Now, as long as it's cabled properly, then you never have to worry about that. So fine. But if the students have the ability to go up and recable things based on the lab topology, this is a must. You need to have an IP domain name because you got to generate RSA keys. And this could be whatever you want, right? It can be, the sky's the limit .local. It does not have to be a fully qualified domain name. In other words, it doesn't have to be legitimate. This is for internal use only. SSH here, you're going to configure 2001 to be the first rotary port. I'll talk about those in just a second. Obviously, IPSSH version 2. If you want to use 5,000 numbers, fine. Maybe your school is using 2,000 level stuff for something else. If they say, well, you could use the 5,000 range, okay, fine. So set it up as the 5,000 range. So now this just says the first port is 2001, and we start with rotary port 1 and we end with rotary port 32 because there are 32 ports on the network module. Sometimes when the card goes in, depending on the slot you put it in, it registers as 0 to 31 or 64 to 95, right? You never know. It could be 32 to 63, right? Because they always start numbering the rotary ports at 0 down below. Whichever interface is your public-facing interface, give it an IP and a mask, and then these are all just default settings. Give it a description, shut down the unused interface. I got to tell you, when I first set up my gateways, I spent 3 days messing with these things, trying to figure out why I couldn't access from outside. I could access the access server from any device on my network, but I could not get in from the outside world. And it's because I was thinking of this as a router, not as an end device. We need a default gateway for the very same reason that we put a default gateway on our switches, because we need an IP address and a way to route back to where we came from. Since we disabled IP routing, there's no routing process, so we need a default gateway configured. And this would be just whatever the default gateway is on the network that this is connected to, just like any other host. Turn on IP HTTP server if you want, or leave it off if you don't. A banner message of the day, again, line con 0, right? The exec timeout means that after 15 minutes and 0 seconds, it's going to boot you off the console line. So if you have to authenticate again, you're going to have to authenticate again. Login local is going to require you to use a username database. So it's one of, whatever. I have a student level password, Cisco, and then I have the administrative password. And you can pre-configure that to privilege level 15 so that when you log in as this admin, you're brought instantly to privilege exec mode. It's a security risk, so, it's up to you. And then we get into the lines, right? So, lines 33 through whatever, in my case, because that's what they come up as. So when you get the card put in and you power it up and you get to privilege exec mode, you have to do a show line and see where these rotary lines connected to. They could be 0 to 31. They could be 1 to 32. There's no way to predict it. So do a show line, see what they are. Login local, rotary, you're going to start at 1. So rotary 1, no exec, transport input SSH. Rotary 2, no exec, transport input SSH. All the way down to rotary whatever. I don't know if, I don't remember if you can use the range command on the rotary configuration or not, but it's simple to do a copy paste, blah, blah, blah. And then, of course, your V2I line configurations. So that is a sample config. There's so many possibilities that I really can't tell you every possibility. And this was for an iOS 12 device. If you end up putting iOS 15, things may look a little bit different. iOS 12 is fine. We're not running any kind of real crazy things that have been changed at all since, iOS 12. Good discussions. So anybody else?
For the final exam, do we only have one time to take it, or can we take it multiple times?
We enable the final one shot.
One shot. Okay.
Yep.
And is it timed or?
Yeah, all exams at Cisco are timed because they have to be. But I give you more than the time that they suggest, because whenever you enable an exam on Netacad, they always default to what they say is the suggested time, and I always extend that 15 to 30 minutes. So, you'll probably get 90 minutes to somewhere in the 90 minutes to 2 hour range. I just have to see what Bernadette decided. But once you log in, you'll have that. So, where's my, there it is. Okay. All right. So I'm just going to have a text file open so that I can talk to you guys about the skills test. So the tasks that you are going to absolutely need to configure are basic router settings, right? Host name, VTY, those kinds of things, IP addresses, descriptions, banner message, all of that stuff. You're going to have to configure SSH for remote access. If I'm not mistaken, I think it's on a switch. Since you have to, because when we do that, they also test you on the ability to set up remote access. And on a switch, it requires a little extra because you have to configure an interface that can accept an IP address. So you have to do an SVI. So you set up your management VLAN, give it an IP address, and no shutdown, and then continue on with your SSH config. And then don't forget the transport input command on your VTY lines. Make sure that you have a username set up with a password before you type transport input SSH. Otherwise, you're going to lock yourself out. You're going to have to configure VLANs, right? There'll be a table. Here's your VLAN table. Here's the names. You really have to, if they give you a name for a VLAN, type it exactly the way it's listed, because they're probably, the whole thing about strings, packet tracer, I don't know what's variable manager in the PTSA and what's not. But so if I give you the PTSA, I have no control over it. If I give you my own, well, I do have control over it, but I don't know if I'll be able to get everything set up so that as long as it has a name, you're fine. So just type exactly what's in the table. Hey, get back here. So you'll have to configure VLANs. You'll have to configure switch ports in VLANs, right? So switch port membership, I should say. Right? What are the commands to do that? How do we tell this switch port F01, hey, I want you to be part of VLAN 30? There's 2 commands that it takes to do that. You're going to have to configure trunking, right? And with that, you'll likely be asked to specify that only the VLANs in the VLAN table are allowed across the trunk length. Switch port, trunk, allowed, VLAN 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. No spaces. If it's a range, if they've got VLANs 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, you can do switch port, trunk, allowed VLAN 1-6, comma 10, comma 20, comma 30. So forth like that. You're going to have to configure trunking, static, and you're going to configure DTP. I know we didn't do it. I'd be happy to do a quick demo on how to configure DTP. You may also be asked to disable dynamic trunking on ports, and that's switch port no negotiate. With routers, you're going to have to configure inter-VLAN routing, router on stick, and layer 3 switch, right? You should know how to do both of them. On the layer 3 switch, it's as simple as configuring a switch virtual interface for every VLAN, and that's going to be the gateway for the VLANs. Once you create that switch virtual interface, then the lines that come into the switch, they're just switch ports. They're not routable ports, right? They might be connected to specific VLANs, or they could be trunks that go down to access layer switches. Your layer 3 switch a lot of times is your distribution layer, so they don't have access ports on them. They're all trunking out to the access layer switches, and then only those VLANs are allowed up. So when something in that VLAN comes in, it comes in the trunk, hits the gateway. The gateway says, oh, you want to get to here? That's a directly connected network, and you can get there going out. Well, gee, you can go out the same way you came in, and see ya. Have fun. So be able to do router on a stick and layer 3 switching. They're different, right? Layer 3 switching is just SVIs. Router on a stick requires that you configure sub interfaces on the physical. We don't give an IP address to the physical interface. We put the IP addresses on all the sub interfaces. Don't forget the native keyword on whatever VLAN they tell you is native. What else do we got to do? Default gateways kind of things, right? And that's going to tie in with the router on a stick and the layer 3. So from what I recall, there's a layer 3 switch that goes out to some VLANs and then to a router. And then there's another router off to the side that has just a simple switch network with some VLANs, and it's doing router on a stick. So you have to actually configure both of them. Static routes, mostly default, right? Default and floating for the, if I'm not mistaken. Right, floating would be a secondary static route to the same destination network through an alternate direction. I don't remember if that's in part 1 or not, or if that was from part 2, but I know there's static routes is certainly a possibility. Possibly port security, right? Port security, we're going to configure the maximum number of MAC addresses, whether MAC address sticky so that it learns the interface, it learns the MAC address and it places it in the config file. don't forget to turn it on. Switch port security is the command that starts everything, but that by itself enables port security. You can configure it all you want, but if you don't enable it, it doesn't do anything. The violation mode, whether it's shut down, restrict, or protect, and that will be based on the language of the lab. If they tell you to require network administrator intervention, that means they're going to have to re-enable the port. That's shutdown. If they say you want to not require intervention, but we want a syslog message to be set, right? That's one versus the other and so forth. So just know the different modes. DHCP configuration. Just setting up a simple DHCP server to hand out. You can create multiple pools on the same router. We're not going to do this with a server. I'm not going to go into all the snooping and blah, 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 all that stuff, ARP inspection. I'm just going to, if I create the lab, I'll give you create DHCP on this router, probably the one that does the inter-VLAN routing through router on a stick. And you'll have to create a pool for each of the 3 networks. I'm not going to go nuts with different subnet masks. It'll be pretty straightforward. I'll tell you to make sure you don't give out this range of addresses. Use this as your domain name. Basic settings. Nothing too elaborate here. And I know that this seems like it might not be a lot of different tasks, but within each of these tasks, there's subsets. This is a fair amount of work. I mean, this is a pretty complex lab. So take your time. I'm not going to, if I deliver it to you, it's just a packet tracer activity. You download, you complete, you submit. One of the things I don't like about the PTSA is it's timed. Now, I could certainly give you 10 hours to complete it, but, no matter what, I have to put a time limit on it. Number 2, it relies on some technologies to deliver the packet tracer activity, and every 5 minutes it takes a copy and submits it back to the server. And every once in a while, somebody's activity crashes and they don't really know where they left, at what point was the last save? You don't know. So you have to kind of go backwards a bunch of steps. And if you're bouncing around the lab, not, going through it step by step, you have no idea. And it's really challenging to figure this out. So that's could be troublesome. And the final thing that I really don't like about the PTSA being delivered through Cisco is that they have this scoring mechanism. And let me see if I can find a file. Just give me a second here. 120, I just did.
So this isn't a lab you created. This is a lab through Cisco.
If I deliver the one through Cisco, yes, that is correct.
Okay, but you don't know yet which one you're going to do?
Yeah, I haven't really quite decided which way I want to go. I have a lab that I had started to develop, and it's similar to the Cisco one because coming up with your own unique topologies and labs, it's a pain in the neck. After a while, you're like, okay, I've had enough. Let me just pull up a score report.
So just to verify, because off of our conversation yesterday, the tests and all the labs are due next Wednesday, right?
Everything is due by next Wednesday, yes. Now,
okay,
the exams will absolutely have to be completed before next Wednesday at 8 o'clock.
AM
I'm
or
going to
PM?
leave the course open until like the end of August.
Okay.
That way you can access things. I'll leave there's some practice exams. If you want to run through those, I'll put those up multiple times. I'll enable the PTSA #2, which has some stuff that I'm not going to, just in case you want to go through it. I'll leave it open, and because I'm supposed to go away on the 7th of August. So, if you didn't finish all the labs by then and wanted to finish them, because I know a couple of you are taking CCNA3 next week, and, you're still trying to finish up week 1, CCNA1. I know that that's the case for some of you. Shame on you, but I know it's the case. And then you're going to trying to wrap up CCNA2 and then CCNA3 for a couple of you. So, I understand. But you have a week to finish the final and the skills test. After I get back from vacation, as long as when I get back and I log in and look at things, as long as all the labs have been submitted and, everything's good, then I can complete you and certify you if you do, perform well enough on the tests and warrant the certification. It's very rare that I don't certify somebody. It does happen though. Occasionally I get somebody that's like, yeah, I can't put you in front of a classroom because you really are just way too weak. But I don't get that sense here. So let's not let's keep the process going the way it's been going. Let me just show you. So, when you take a test, this is feedback that I get. The student gets some of this, but I get this whole document. When you take the PTSA, I get a nice little rubric. So for those of you that have to do workforce skills, checklists, so like in a high school, I know we have to do a senior evaluation, which has the skills. Here's your skills. You get one for each book. List them down, and there's your checklist, right? Just check them off. You're good to go. These are the tasks that you've completed correctly. Now we get some variable keys. So there's variable management in this. There was in this particular lab. The scoring, this student got 94 out of 100 points. That was great. In this section, performance component, configuring ACLs. Configuring ACLs is a category, then there's subcategories, and then there's tasks. ACL configuration was worth 6 points. There was one task, configuring this ACL called Block 15. It was one ACL, and it had basically just these statements. If you get this correct, which he did, you get 6 points. Got this one correct, so we got the 4 points. Custom device management.
I'm sorry, is this generated by the exam when the students have finished the exam?
When they do the PTSA that Cisco delivers, yes.
Oh, I see. Okay.
You can get this by logging in and looking at their results. And what I do is I do it in Chrome, so I do a print, and then I just save it as a PDF, right? Because Chrome can. This is a web page that I've printed. It's not a PDF that Cisco has sent me. I don't know why they don't just automatically email them to me. It's silly. So here's security. It's worth 2 points, and here's the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 tasks to get these 2 points. If you miss any one of these 5, you get 0 points. It's binary scoring. It's all or nothing. And okay, so it's no big deal when it's 2 points, but when it's 5 or 6 or 9 points, right? I mean, suppose you configured one router, RIP networks, just fine, but on another router, you forgot the version 2 command. You missed one simple little thing. You get 0 out of 9 points. or 0 out of 6 points, or I should say, right? So this is a pet peeve of mine. So I've had students leave the exam in a huff, like slamming their books shut and stomping out the door, even though I tell them, don't pay attention to the score the PTSA gives you, because it's binary scoring. I have reported this to our technical director for the Northeast region. They need to provide the student with both scores. And she's like, well, why do they need to? I'm like, because I don't give the binary score. And she goes, but that's the only score you get. Yeah, okay, you keep telling yourself that. I know how to get the standard packet tracer graded score. So anyway, I will post your actual scores after I open them up and evaluate them and look at them. So what I used to do was go back through and say, okay, well, there's 10 things here. You missed 2 of them. So you got 0 out of 9 points. I'm going to give you 7 points. Right? And I'd go back and give those points manually. But I've since learned how to do that even easier, because all of these things are tasks in the activity, and they have point values, and Packet Tracer does have a grade, but they don't show you the completion percentage. So I go in and get that, and that's what I give you. I've seen students who've been given a 35 by the scoring model who had an 85 by Packet Tracer scoring model. Okay, think about it. If you miss one item in every one of these block categories, you will have completed 90% of the lab correctly. You know what your score is going to be? A goose egg. It's going to be a 0. Right? I mean, where's the educational value in this? This is supposed to be a tool. In an ideal world, Cisco wants us to give you this lab to practice with, and then come in and do the entire lab on live gear. If you have the gear, yeah, do it. I don't have that much gear, so I can't put a class of 18 students through a live equipment lab all at once. I would have to do scheduled exams, and it's just a nightmare. So anyway, this thing, so you see here, he got half of this correct, but got nothing out of 6 points. So by all rights, he should have had a 97. I mean, it's just, any good teacher would say, yeah, okay, so you missed these little things. Yeah, I'm going to give you partial credit. There's no partial credit. But then as you follow down, these are the directions for the lab, the topology. Here's the answer script. So these are the configurations that should be on each device when the lab is done. Right? And then the student. And there's when I go look at the results for the student, this is it used to be a Java-based little applet that ran. And what it would do is it would prep their PKA, and it actually temporarily downloaded it to your computer. You could launch it, open it up, interact with their PKA, go in and do some show commands. And, so you could conference with the student and say, see, if you had just done this, boom, you're done. The student doesn't get this ability, but I do. So I typically will launch them, and I can go in and interact with their PKA, and that's how I get at their packet tracer score versus this Marvel scoring. Now, this is the student's final config. Every configuration on the devices, that the way the student configured it. So I could go in and look and see, well, what did you do wrong with this? Oh, this should have been 51, not 52, right? And then this is the cool thing. Every command with a timestamp that they entered for the entire duration of the lab. So I can see how often they entered a question mark. I could see how often they were trying to tab line complete or entering the wrong command, or I can see what commands they were trying to do that were incorrect. I'm like, wow, you were just all over the place, had no idea how to do this configuration. So I get pages and pages and pages of everything that they configured. Now, this document is 36 pages long. No, I'm not printing them out. And no, I do not email these to students because they have answers on them, answer scripts. I will conference with them and show them, but I do not email them. The student gets the beginning where they show them what they got correct and what they got incorrect. They'll get that report and that's it. Okay, so that's a report. Do we have any questions? Have I sparked any? Oh, by the way, I wondered about this. Nope. Going once, going twice, going 3 times. Oh, okay. All right, so I'm going to do a simple DTP configuration. Okay. Let me just do. Okay. All right. So what we're talking about is dynamic trunking protocol. Sorry, not the VTP. I misspoke. Dynamic trunking protocol. So I'll configure DTP as well. So in the curriculum, there's this VTP, VLAN trunking protocol. And what this does, I hate the fact that these settings don't stay. Okay. So on the left, enable conft host name S1, enable conft host name S2. So there has to be some simple stuff. I'm not going to go through any of the basic configs. So VLAN trunking protocol allows me to configure my VLANs on one device and propagate that out through the entire network. So before that happens, because it's VLAN trunking protocol, I have to configure this as a trunk link. So if I look at this, I'm going from gig 1 to gig 1, 01 to gig 01. So if I go to int gig 01, switch port mode trunk, switch port right? So no negotiate, device will not engage in negotiation protocol on this interface. I've just disabled DTP, D as in David, TP, dynamic trunking protocol. Switch port trunk, right? if I do this, I have to define the native VLAN and the allowed VLANs. I'm not ready to specify the native VLAN or the allowed VLANs because I haven't configured VLANs yet. And you don't want to configure your VLANs until after you configure VLAN trunking protocol. Okay, so on switch 2, I'm going to go to int gig 01, switch port mode trunk, switch port no negotiate. Okay, I'm going to fast forward time. So now spanning tree is up and running. Now that I have trunks, now I can configure VTP. So I'm going to get off the interface and I'm going to do VTP and question marks to show you. I'm going to specify the domain, the mode, the password, and then the version. So the mode is server. Now, the default mode on switches is server. That's important to know. Switch port, VTP domain, whatever, CCNA.local. VTP password, Cisco. VTP version, right? 1 or 2. What do you think? I'm going to go with 2. Okay, so I've configured my server. As long as all the settings match between the 2 switches, with the exception of the mode, right? So if I do VTP mode client, I'm still not going to receive VLAN information from the other switch because now I need to set my domain, password, and version. They have to match. So VTP domain CCNA.local. VTP, oh, look at that. Domain was already set to CCNA.local. How do you suppose that happened? Well, because they were both set to server, since that's the default status, once I modified this, it sent out a VTP packet, and this guy said, oh, you want me to change my domain? Okay. So what I'm getting at here is there's a danger in putting a switch on your network before it's configured. So very frequently you configure your switches on a network, off the network on your bench before you plug them into the network. Now you could rack it, just don't hook it up. And the reason that this is good to know is because if there is VTP information on that one and that has VLANs, they may propagate out into your network. And you're like, wait a minute, I don't want those VLANs. And now it's a hassle to get rid of them because they're all throughout the network. So VTP password, Cisco, VTP version 2. Okay, show VLAN brief. Oops, do show VLAN brief. So I just want to demonstrate that all I have here are the default VLANs. Okay, and same thing here. Do show VLAN brief. Just default VLANs. So now if I go over here and I create VLAN 10, name admin, VLAN 20, name teacher, VLAN 30, name student, VLAN 99, name management, show VLAN brief. Look at that. I've got my VLANs because VLAN trunking protocol will propagate the VLANs for me. What they won't do is port assignment. I still have to get on the switch and do the port assignment. So more and more network admins are saying, well, then what's the point of doing VTP? Because frequently people don't set it up properly in the beginning, and then they have to wipe the switch and start from scratch, and it can create problems. So I tend to have my VLAN config as part of my text file that I just dump into the routers. Now, sometimes what I'll do, because I used to manage the devices for the building I worked in at Questar, and I would have a separate text file for my VLANs, so that when I was pasting the config for that device, I would dump the VLANs in as well. I had a standard config and then my VLANs separate. That way I didn't have to have a config for each device. And then if I added or changed VLANs, I'd have to go back and touch each one of those configs. It just made it easier. So
Michael, that's the exact lab I had issue on, just with the BTP. Is it possible?
Wait a minute. Which TP? V as in Victor or D as in David?
The V as in Victor.
Okay.
With the copying over, automatically copying over one VLAN to another, and then I was going through stuff online, and it showed that if you have multiple routers, how they just switches. Sorry, I don't know why I keep saying router. Multiple switches. How like it will continue to send packets between each other to check if you have one and you have one and you have one, to make sure all of the what's the name? It had the same version of them on all of them. And then one changes, then it send it back through. But is it possible for you to, or is it in the instructions, I just missed them, the commands that you just used?
Is it possible to what?
Is it? I was gonna say, is it possible for you to like paste those commands you just used, or are they in the reading text? And I just
they should be in the text, yeah, because there's only those 4. But there are issues with the order in which you configure, not necessarily the order in which you enter those commands. So what I'm getting at here is the way VTP packet works is all from this configuration revision. So every time I go in and I make a change to the VTP configuration, it increases the revision. Okay? So I'm going to redo this lab. Now, I didn't save any of this. I have to erase VLAN.dat. Delete VLAN.dat. Delete Control Z. Delete VLAN.dat. Okay. Oh, look, the VLANs are there. See, they're still there. What do you think? Do I want to save the configuration file? No, I don't, because I'm trying to wipe the switch and start from scratch. Okay, so I'm going to redo this real quick and show you why VTP is such a pain in the neck. Because I go on to switch 1 and I do enable conf t, host name S1, do show VLAN, right? Just want to show you there's no VLANs. Okay. Enable conf t, host name S2, do show VLANs. Again, no VLANs, right? If I go into this and do VLAN 10, name admin, VLAN 20, name teacher, I'm going to stop there. VTP domain, CCNA.com, VTP password, Cisco, VTP version 2. VTP mode server. It's already server. Okay. Do show VLAN brief. There's my VLANs. Sorry, no VLANs. Oh, right. I forgot to configure this as a client. VTP mode client, VTP password Cisco, VTP, domain, CCNA.local, set the, and VTP version 2. Okay, now do show VLAN. Right, so I didn't get the VLANs. They won't propagate. Do show VTP stat. Configuration revision is 0. Do show VTP stat. My configuration revision here is 1. Oh, so it's sending VTP information, but for some reason this is not accepting it, because the only thing that got sent in this revision, did I type VTP Cisco? I did, CCNA.com. Sorry. VTP domain CCNA.com. Okay, there we go. The only thing that got changed once I configured VTP was like the domain name, the password, and all that stuff. The VLANs didn't get propagated because they were not part of VTP at that point in time. So let's see what happens if I go over here and I do VLAN 30 name students. Right? Do show VLAN brief. Okay, I got 3 VLANs. Do show VLAN brief. They're not going over. And we're always going to be behind here. So this is the problem. So now it's like, okay, well, I'm not getting the VLANs. And you can spend hours trying to fuss with this. In theory, they say if I do a VTP domain null and VTP domain CCNA.com, by resetting the VTP domain name, they say it resets the counters and it should propagate. But it doesn't always work. So now it's like, okay, what do I do? How do I, and you end up wiping the switch and starting from scratch, okay? So let me just get back on to trunking, because I did want to show you something else. Int gig 01, switch port mode trunk, switch port no negotiate, int gig 01, switch port mode trunk, switch port no negotiate. Okay. Switch port trunk, allowed VLAN, right? You actually have to type the word VLAN. And now they want to know what VLANs. So which VLAN IDs do we want to allow? I could just say all, but that's kind of silly because that's the default. All VLANs are allowed across the trunk from by default. I could do except, all VLANs except the black hole VLAN, right? So I could create that black hole VLAN. I could add, I could remove. So I'm going to show you how to start this. Whoops. 1, comma 10, comma 20, right? Let's just say that we did that. Time goes by, we added a third VLAN. So allowed VLAN add 30. I couldn't just do this, because if I do this, right? There it is. It replaces what was there. That's bad. So if once I realize, oh, I meant to do this, now I got to go back and add 1, 10, and 20. Right, so now I just typed the wrong command, didn't I? Yeah, I did. I forgot to type add. Add 30. And now it adds 30 to the end of the existing list. I could also remove, oh, wait a minute, VLAN 1, I don't want that one across, whatever. Now I could remove 20. And there it is. It's just 1, 10, and 30. Okay. So I could look at the running config. The other way I could look at the trunking information is do show interface trunk. Shows me what my interfaces are in trunking mode, the VLANs that are allowed on the trunk, the VLANs that are allowed on the trunk and are active in the management domain, and VLANs in spanning tree forwarding state. We don't really.
Michael, odd thought.
Yep.
On one of the packet tracer labs, they had us, or on, it may not have been a lab, but may have been one of the syntax checkers, but they had us do the allow VLANs and ended with a range of like 30 to 49 or something like that. If you did that and then came through and did a remove and it was in the middle of that range.
Okay, so let's do it. So switch port trunk allowed VLAN add 100 to 199. Now let's 60 till, oh. Does packet tracer not support?
No, this is show command.
What? No, I know. Oh, I guess in the add command, you can't add a range. So I just switched it. So the only things that are allowed are now 100 to 199. Switch port trunk allowed VLAN remove 150. Do show int trunk. And now you see that we have the split range. Okay. So absolutely okay. We just can't put a range in the remove or the add. So you have to think about, how do I formulate this command so that I don't have to add each individual or subtract each individual or whatever. I could do switch port trunk allowed VLAN 1, 10 or 20 through 30, 45, 47, 50 to 99. I mean, totally disjunct, right? Discontiguous bunch of VLANs. No problem. They're there. But when we're going to add and remove, we can't do ranges. All right. How's everybody feeling? Um,
I mean, that answered a few of my questions, so that's good.
Good. You know, I'm waiting for questions. That's really all I'm there for. All right. So there's going to be a bunch of things to deal with. I have to decide if I'm going to do the skills exams. If I do the skills exam, it'll be just part 1 that is required, and I will send out an email to kind of follow up with all of this. I will, however, enable this, the part 2, for you to complete at your leisure if you so desire. I'll leave it open till the end of August, and I'll let you complete it multiple times. You know, because that's just for you to get a sense of. If I give you my own activity, packet tracer activity, which I still haven't decided because I still have some work to do on it. And honestly, like just to get a few things added to a packet tracer skills assessment, that could take me 8 to 10 hours of fiddling and making sure the directions are just right and adding the components and doing the pre-configurations and testing it and making sure that by adding device or devices, they all play nice and everything still propagates the way it's supposed to, and I don't create other problems. So I may just do this because I'm also dealing with a problem with one of my pets. They're having surgery today.
Mike, is it okay if you use we just take both 1 and 2? It's okay if we take those. I mean, you already said earlier that you're basing us not off of our grades so much, but off of the fact of what we did in class and
absolutely.
stuff like that,
But I'm not going to make you do both of these. I don't want that. But I'd like to give you a little bit more than the PTSA Part 1 includes. But if I don't, I'm not. Trust me, I'm not stressing over this. I'm just
Okay.
I'm just trying to decide what I'm going to do, and some of this depends on, you know, when I get done here, what I hear from the vet, and you know what the progress is. So that's all. That's why I'm saying I'm not going to start this until 8 o'clock tomorrow because I don't really know what I'm going to be doing right this second. So
right
and
now,
I may
all
just
we
do
need
that.
to do is part 1 and then
Yeah.
the practice final as the
Part 1 will be required, and this final exam and the course feedback. Right?
Okay.
You got to get in the habit of making your students do the course feedback. I think now they've actually set it up so that you can't graduate them until they complete the course feedback. But it used to be that it didn't matter. As long as they did the final exam here, right, Ethan, this is how we managed for a while. But now the students have to complete the course feedback to get graduated here. Well, the advantage in the past, and with the courses they're running at Hudson Valley up till now, but the course that you're running at Excelsior, since you're still using the version 6 curriculum, books 1 and 2 were the books that aligned with CCENT, and books 3 and 4 aligned with CCNA, the rest of it. So at the end of book 2 and at the end of book 4, if you got a 75 or better on the final exam, you got a discount voucher for the CCNA test. Well, now book 3 is the voucher, if you will, exam for CCNA test. So, you know, whether they take the book 1 or book 2 final exam, that's up to you, right? You don't have to, but why create a new exam? If you're doing 1 class per semester, let them do the exam, use it as the final and go. So course feedback and final exam will be required. These are just informational. I'll turn those on. I didn't want to have so much in front of you that you're like overwhelmed. I will enable this. I will put all of this in an email that I will send out tonight. I will enable the practice exam. I think I can enable the practice final for more than a week, but I can't enable the final exam for more than a week. So this doesn't do anything except gives you practice. How closely this models the actual final exam, I can't tell you. This is first time through teaching this course. I have no students to have given me feedback. In the past, I used to just remove this right from the modules page, because in past curriculum, I got a lot of students telling me doing that practice final did nothing to help me for the final. The questions were just so different, and I did not find it at all helpful.
In the first class, I found they were very similar. There was just really just a difference in the number of questions was really what it was.
And that's the thing. Every time they change a curriculum, you have to learn some of this stuff all over again. You know, so there's a little bit of a learning curve. All right. So there we are. I'm going to leave these modules open so that if you're not finished with the labs, which I know not all of you are, you'll have until the end of August at the very latest to submit everything. I would ask that once you have submitted everything, because I know that you're going to be doing this at different rates. Don't worry about telling me I've completed the final or I've completed the skills test, unless you've also submitted all the labs and have the course feedback done. If you've done all of it, send me an email. I will go in and look at it and confirm that you've paid your bill and certify you, if possible, right away. At that point, you'll be able to open and create a class on your own. If you haven't submitted all the labs, then don't tell me that you've completed the final or you've completed the skills. It doesn't matter. I'm not going to certify you until everything's done. And then after the exam and the deadline for the 2 exams, once you complete all the rest of the stuff, shoot me an email so that, again, I can get you up and running as quickly as possible. But that 1 week for the exams, I'm holding firm to that. So just be aware. I know that some of you may have gotten a little bit of a lax with CCNA1, and that kind of really gets under our skin, because then we have people that are emailing us, on Labor Day. By the way, can you reopen that final? I really need to because I got to teach tomorrow. There's an old sign that I used to have. I don't know where it went. It was a paper sign. Lack of coordination on your part does not constitute an emergency on mine. Just get the work done, right? Just get those 2 things. Labs, I'll take those a little bit late, but August 31st is the absolute cutoff. All right. If there are no more questions, then I am finished. I have done what I need to do. And if there's no more questions, then obviously you guys are done. And we can say our goodbyes. A couple of you I will see tomorrow as we start CCNA3. And the rest of you, I will wish you a healthy and safe and enjoyable rest of your summer, and great success in the new school year, whatever that may look like for you.
Thank you very much, Mike.
Yeah.
All right, thanks, Michael.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
And any questions, you can always reach out directly. I am an employee of the support center, so I do field questions. Specifically, I usually get all the packet tracer questions. If you email David or Karen with a question about packet tracer, it's always going to come to me. So if you've got questions, feel free to email me. If you desire a training on packet tracer, contact David and see if they can set up, and maybe we'll send out a notification to see if anybody else is interested, because I do remote training with packet tracer on an as needed basis, as long as there's a few people. I generally don't do it one-on-one unless it's a simple thing. Okay, so good luck to everybody, and stay safe.
Thanks, Mike. I'll see you tomorrow.
Absolutely. Okay. Take care, everybody.